but it's emerged around the world, and it can create some complacency. So as an investor, you want to see that they respect the money, that there are proper reporting mechanisms, and all of these things today can be digitally delivered. So to help them get their financing, we need to educate them. We've heard from our friend Adnan today about education. It's vital. It's absolutely vital that we start an education program. So maybe Dubai SME could join forces and do an educational program to say to a potential university graduate, a startup is a very valid thing to do when you leave university. If you ask a university student in the US, what do they want to do when they leave? They'll say a startup. They might not say that here yet, but it's coming. And we've heard statistics today that 80% of the jobs from a person in 8th grade today won't exist by the time they leave education. That's phenomenal.
And the GDP contribution also, as we said,
and the GDP,
60%.
thanks to Mr. Sharjah, the GDP figure here is astonishing. 60% of GDP here, right here, is coming from SMEs, and that target is growing to 70%. It's a goal to grow it to 70%. So it's categorically vital that the two divides meet. The bridges must be built. The bridge between an investor and his needs and demands, and the needs and demands of an SME, in order to put them onto a capital superhighway that will allow them to get to their destination faster. That's the most vital thing for me.
On the same plane, you in India also, Mr. Balasubramanian, you also have an experience of it, because BSE has an SME platform actually listed. I think about 190 companies are now listed on the small scale sector as well as. What is the experience and how is it now faring? Because I heard that the trading is actually increasing by the day.
So similar to UAE, even in India, SME is probably one of the most important sectors. Roughly close to about 45% of the India's GDP also comes from the SME sector. And almost 70% of the total number of jobs are actually created from the SME sector. So this has been one of the priority areas for the government. And in the last 5-6 years, about 5 years back, our securities regulator, SEBI, actually came up with a set of rules in terms of creating a SME listing board, which was different from the main board listing. And BSE at that time actually was the pioneer exchange, and it took the initiative to actually get the SME ecosystem startup, which included as well as the startup system. And as we speak, today we have become very successful in almost getting close to about 200 listings. And there are almost, every month we are seeing 10 or 15 new listings come. So always the typical problem with SMEs is that SME companies always had lack of finances. They always had problem in terms of raising money. And probably the way it started was that people probably borrow from their friends, their families, and then slowly they'd go to banks, which is the only funding which is available, which was very expensive for them because they were not large kind of players. So what we did is we have virtually created a disintermediated model. So now these SME companies can directly get listed. And what we have done is, as a regulator, we have created a separate set of standards in terms of disclosure standards, in terms of the admission standards, also in terms of the eligibility criteria for these companies to come and list. So this has all of a sudden created virtually a kind of a two-way system in India. Like there is a school and then there is a college. So when you go to the main board, you basically are already an adult and you are a college person, where you are pretty much aware. Whereas SME is more like a school type of thing, nurturing somebody and bringing them into the market. And also this also becomes a good track record place, because once you come into the SME segment, you start showing a track record to people, then immediately you are also qualified to graduate and get into the main board also. So this two-step formula has really worked very, very well for us. And as we speak, virtually about 37 industry sectors have companies which are listed on the BSE right now in terms of the SME. And in fact, we have become a model case study for both the World Federation of Exchange and United Nations in terms of promoting the SME system to come to the market. And this has all of a sudden freed the entrepreneurs. Now they know that there is an alternative way to raise money. You can go to the market participants. There are a lot of funds which actually invest in startups or basically ventures. And also many governments and provincial governments in India, which are the state governments, I've also dedicated some funding for this particular sector as one of the key things. And when they come into the exchange, it adds to two things. One is it adds some amount of discipline to those promoters because they have to run the company in a clean way. The books of accounts have to be clean. There has to be some set of disclosures, which though may not be as stringent as the main board, but it starts creating a kind of a discipline out there. And secondly, this also unlocks the wealth for the promoter of the company or the entrepreneur who is setting up the small and medium enterprise. He is no longer just chasing income. He is virtually converting his capital into a wealth generation exercise. And that is something, for example, I will tell you that when we started the SME in 2012, at that time we also started a SME IPO index, which was at 100 points. Today, as we speak, in less than 5 years, the index level is close to about 1100, which means it's gone up by 11 times in terms of the companies which are given return on investments. Again, these companies may be small, but they will be the fastest growing. But there is also an high risk element in that. And for that, what we are done in terms of the regulatory framework is we don't allow every small investor to invest in SME. We have created a qualified investor criteria. So we have put in a number which is equivalent to, from Indian perspective, it's 100,000 rupees, which is like close to about, say about $4,000 minimum investment, which one needs to actually make. And also the trading lot is also restricted to that 100,000 rupees. So this has ensured that we don't worry about basically the smallest investor who may be ignorant, so who needs to be protected. But here we are getting informed investors to come who are actually investing in these stories and they are benefiting out of it. So this is clearly proven to be a big thing.
Thank you, Balan. For Edward, another question, the similar thing, what we do is about, you mentioned about the crowdfunding. Crowdfunding experience is actually, somewhere it is faulty or somewhere there is an experiment which has not taken up roots recently some other places. Can this model be emulated here, the crowdfunding? Because whether this market is mature enough to accept that concept?
We talked earlier before we embarked on the panel, and I was privy, because we're centrally banked, we have a central bank regulation in our exchange. I was privy to that central bank's information about crowdfunding, and it's this. Every central bank had three choices. One is pretend it's not there. So imagine a central bank as a regulator is pretending that an industry sector is not there, and most of them took that option, by the way. The second is integrate it into existing legislation, and the third is be creative and create new legislation to govern crowdfunding. So crowdfunding is no longer in its infancy. In the UK, in America, it's enormous. In China, it's enormous. In Brazil, it's enormous. The IMF says by 2020 it will dwarf all private equity and VC capital. So crowdfunding's here to stay. And now regulation is creeping in. So whether it's emulated here, I can't answer that question directly, because I think it will change by the time crowdfunding would take hold here. I think what can happen here is something different. The UAE has a blank canvas. It's had a blank canvas. It's had enormous growth. It's a success story. And given that, what we've just heard here is categorically right. We need stepping stones. Early stage companies can't go to big board exchanges. We need stepping stones. Crowdfunding can become complicated because, as I mentioned earlier, people might not respect the capital if it becomes too easy to get. So if somebody like Dubai SME decides to create an index fund, for example, they put small money into small to medium-sized enterprises, and then the crowd follows them because they have some confidence that a government organization has put some money in, and the rest needs to come from the crowd, if you like. That's something that could work here, because there would be a following mentality. And if you've got reporting mechanisms and structures that are not big board exchange structures, big board exchanges are fit for purpose for big board companies, blue chip companies, not small cap companies. Small cap companies must have a new set of rules and regulations to govern them because they don't fit in the shoe of a big board exchange. I hope that
Okay, if
answers the question.
crowdfunding is not fine, but what about the PE, private equity, as well as even venture funds? Venture funds are not actually venturing into even financing SMEs here. They can do that. Now, how can we make it attractive for PEs or even venture funds or even what's called the angel investors?
I can make this a very selfish answer because I believe what I'm doing is the answer to that question. If you have a platform that I'm bringing to Dubai called Dubai SX, then this platform would allow you as an investor, as an investment fund, to mitigate risk. You will be getting more information than anybody has ever got on a company that's on a platform that you have an investment in. And that's a big statement to make, but that's because we've done it. And so the answer is you bring something to Dubai like Dubai SX, you launch it here, and you make a big noise about it. You create an index next to Dubai SX. You use some of that money from that index fund to invest in SMEs. You get the private equity funds to follow. They're actually all here. They're just not doing the activity. And it just needs a tipping point to get them from where they are today to now the bank is interested in going into small to medium-sized enterprises because that's where the uplift is. The uplift is not in the blue chip stock. The uplifts are there, but they're not the same as an early stage investment. Early stage investments governed correctly with the right attitude are the growth sector. We are going to see Dubai go from, or UAE go from 60 to 70% of GDP and maybe more. And if that's the case, we would be delinquent in our responsibilities to those companies and to those investors if we don't create a platform that allows them to participate safely and securely. So long-winded way, I'm sorry, but I think that's the answer.
Thank you, Edward. For Bala, I think is that about the Indian market. Actually, the Indian market is actually going through volatility as well as last week it reached almost 30,000 on Sensex. How can the NRIs here, even other investors, of course, you allow them, how can they access the Indian market? Not through portfolio management, but how can they effectively engage in the Indian success story?
So today, NRIs anyway traditionally are investing in the Indian capital markets. There has been a kind of a methodology by which they have to repatriate funds into India by opening something called a non-resident ordinary account, which all Indian banks open for them. And obviously the thing is they convert their money from whatever currency they earn in, whether it is dirhams or dollars or pounds or whatever it is, they have to convert it into rupee. And then that can be invested. And typically they will have a bank which is designated as their portfolio investment management service, PIMS account as we call it, and they keep track of the accounting of that money. This is required because India is a capital restriction, has some capital restrictions which the central bank has put in place. But a lot of NRIs still find India to be a very popular destination because they know about the country. And they also know that a lot of growth is taking place in that particular market compared to the rest of the developed world in some sense, which are much more mature in some sense. And we have been seeing that NRI investments year on year has been growing. Especially in the last decade, we have seen that a lot of repatriation has happened by non-resident Indians into India, which is again fueling growth in the markets as well. And what has been done is, today there are some mutual funds which are targeting specifically this NRI community, and they have been offering them a kind of a service packaging in which they could do it. But in terms of direct trading, today there are many Indian broking firms which are into mobile trading and internet trading, which also offers the similar kind of facilities to NRIs and are attracting them. But now with this new exchange, which is coming up in the international center, it's going to become a complete different ball game for NRIs. One is there are going to be no restrictions here. So effectively, whatever foreign currency you're earning, you could actually participate in the international exchange by India International Exchange by just keeping it in foreign currency. And whatever trading which you do or whatever investments you do and whatever returns which you realize out of that, you will be able to bring it back to wherever you are. which is not the case currently in terms of India, because there it's on a non-repatriable basis, whereas here it will be repatriation. And this is something which typically many NRIs today want to trade in derivatives, which is a much larger market than the underlying markets. And in India, we have a clear restriction for NRIs not to be able to repatriate the profits which they make on derivative transaction. While in the international exchange now with this liberalized rule, NRIs will be able to do that. And that's going to be a big opportunity for them. But overall, India has realized that given the magnitude of its population, the amount of job opportunities it has to create, the amount of projects, I think the government of India estimates just $20 trillion investments over the next 5 to 7 years to be invested on the infrastructure sector alone. So that's the kind of money or a capital which is to be raised, because that's the kind of a potential. So now, obviously, based on that, we have a very pro-business government in India. For the last 20 years, we have been slowly opening the door for more and more foreign investments. And in some sense, today we have created a much easier way even to access India. So earlier we used to have a foreign institutional investment mode, where only institutional investors were permitted, and they were also screened to ensure that only significant large institutions could come and invest in India. Last couple of years back, this whole policy was changed and converted into an FPI policy, which has been where the portfolio investors have been broken into 3 categories. Category 1, which is all sovereign investors. Category 2 are all the institutional investors who are regulated in their own markets. And category 3 could be virtually anyone else. So effectively, in some sense, now all of a sudden, the whole floodgates have been opened for a lot of foreign investments to come. And even, for example, the recent growth which you talked about in the index level and all that, we have been seeing a lot of foreign investment influx at this particular point of time.
The DIFC equivalent, what you call is that your India International Exchange. For your information, this is actually operating from Gujarat. It's called GIFT, Gujarat Investment